Welcome back and thanks for stopping by. And in this video I'm going to be reviewing my favourite classic rock bands, my top 10 ranking. But before we get into that, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already subscribed, please hit the button. If you could also like, leave a comment, share and hit the notification bell. All that stuff really helps out my channel and I greatly appreciate it. Okay, so classic rock is a very broad term and I just want to define some of the genres that I don't include in the classic rock bracket. So there's some bands that I've left off this list notably because it's very hard to try and focus a list down to just 10, and I'm trying to focus on bands with great singers, great drummers, great guitar players. That's to me is the essence of classic rock, and bands that made a massive impact in the scene. So I'm not saying that any of the bands that I'm going to list out now don't have those elements, but I just didn't feel that they could make the list for classic rock. They certainly would make other top 10 lists, but not the classic rock list. Okay, so some of the bands I've excluded from my list include a lot of the 60s bands like the Stones, the Beatles, the Kinks. I haven't included any of those bands on this list. I've also left out the sort of virtuoso musicians from the 60s who had like a backing band. So for example, the Jimi Hendrix Experience aren't included here, the Jeff Beck Group, people like that. I haven't included any heavy metal on this list. So there's no Metallica, there's no Black Sabbath, no UFO, no Motorhead. I haven't included hair metal either. So Van Halen, Bon Jovi, sorry, haven't included you on this list. I haven't included any AOR. So bands like Journey or Foreigner, haven't included them on the list either. And I haven't included any prog rock. So bands like Rush, Pink Floyd, King Crimson, and Yes, they haven't been included either. And the last category that I haven't included, I believe, is the soft rock category, which is fair enough, I suppose, when you're talking about classic rock. So soft rock bands like Fleetwood Mac, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Bruce Springsteen, and of course the Eagles. So taking all of those bands out of the mix, this is my top 10 classic rock bands. Okay, so coming in at number 10, it's Bad Company. So Bad Company to me are a band that completely embody classic rock. They are exactly what you expect from a classic rock band. They've got a great frontman in Paul Rodgers, absolutely fantastic. He came from a band called Free, and he also brought along with him his drummer called Simon Kirk. On the bass on this band, we had a guy called Boz Burrell, and on lead guitar was Mick Ralphs. So essentially, this was a super group. All these players had played in bands previously, and they all had great chops coming into this band. But I have to say, Bad Company were exceptional. They have so many classic rock hits, and I suppose if you grew up in America in the 1970s, 1980s and you were listening to classic rock radio, I'm sure Bad Company were all over the place everywhere. You probably couldn't get away from them. Some standout tracks from Bad Company: Can't Get Enough, Rock Steady, of course the song Bad Company, which is brilliant, Good Love and Gone Mad, that's a brilliant song as well, Feel Like Making Love, Shooting Star is excellent as well. There's just so many. They're an absolutely brilliant band, Bad Company, and if you haven't checked them out, I suggest you do check them out. So they are my number 10 in my top classic rock bands. Coming in at number 9, this might be a little bit controversial. It is Whitesnake, or as we say in Ireland, White Snake. This band have been one of my favourites for years. Absolutely love Whitesnake. They started off, I suppose, when Deep Purple disbanded and David Coverdale decided he wanted to continue making music and continue with a band. I think he roped in Ian Pace and John Lord for some of the earlier albums, but then they soon left to rejoin Deep Purple in 1985, 1986. But he essentially assembled some of the best blues musicians in the English scene at the time. There was Bernie Marsden, of course, absolutely fantastic guitar player. He was involved in a lot of the earlier albums. He had some fantastic drummers as well, like Cozy Powell, and great bass players like Neil Murray. So really the cream of the crop of English blues and jazz musicians in the early Whitesnake albums, and those albums are absolutely brilliant. But around the mid 1980s, he got signed to Geffen Records, or should I say Whitesnake got signed to Geffen Records, and David Coverdale decided he wanted to go in a more American way. So they released an album in 1984, I believe. It was called Slide It In, and they had a UK version and a US version, and the tracks were basically scrambled in different orders, and the production style in the US was much more US radio friendly, really a classic rock album. So they went from being a blues band who were a little bit, on the fringes in England, doing quite well, but, not really making much waves across the Atlantic, excuse the pun. But then in 1984, when Slide It In was released, they just really started going hard in America. Then the hair metal scene came in, and they decided they wanted to, go into that kind of music. So David, notoriously, he is a perfectionist and can be hard to work with. So there was a revolving door of musicians throughout, all of the 1980s and late 1970s. But for the 1987 album, which is this one I'm holding here, he brought in a guy called John Sykes, who helped him record the majority of the songs. Helped him write the majority of the songs on this album and recorded all the guitars on this album. This album was basically recorded as a 4-piece with additional keyboards provided by another musician, I can't remember. But this album is absolutely top notch. John Sykes is a fantastic guitarist, and one of my favourite guitarists of all time. Of course, he was in the Tigers of Pantan, and then he went on to join Thin Lizzy for their last album, Ride the Lightning. Or sorry, not Ride the Lightning. Thunder and Lightning. Ride the Lightning's Metallica. But he had a fantastic performance on that. Then Thin Lizzy split up. I think he did some stuff with Phil Lynott after that, but then he joined Whitesnake in 1984. He toured the Slide It In album. I don't think he actually played on much of the album, but he played on all of this album, 1987. So it was David Coverdale on vocals, John Sykes on guitar and vocals, Neil Murray on bass, and Ainsley Dunbar on drums. I think Cosy Powell was meant to be the drummer in this one, but they couldn't get an agreement. But so Whitesnake then became a hair metal band essentially, but really, really good. A lot better than Motley Crue, Poison, or any of those other bands. I really think Whitesnake were fantastic. Then they had some more lineup changes. John Sykes left the band. They brought in Adrian Vandenberg and a guitarist from Belfast called Vivian Campbell, who had previously played with a band called Dio, who you might have heard of. And Vivian Campbell then, he left, and Steve Vai joined. So there was sort of a revolving door of guitarists there with Whitesnake in the late 1980s. They released an album called Slip of the Tongue in, I think it was 1989. They headlined Donington in 1990, and then the band kind of broke up and had reunion tours and stuff, but they were never the same. They were never the same when they got back together. But still a great classic rock band. Okay, the next band, number 8, is Cream. Okay, Cream, a supergroup from the late 1960s. I know I haven't included the Beatles, I haven't included the Stones, but I've included Cream. But to me, Cream are more of what I consider a classic rock band than the other two bands. I know they were only a 3-piece. You had Ginger Baker on drums, Jack Bruce on vocals and bass, and of course Eric Clapton on guitar and vocals. But to me, an absolute classic band, classic rock band. Definitely songs like Sunshine of Your Love, Strange Brew, all that stuff. Absolutely brilliant, top drawer. And this album is actually from their reunion tour in 2005 at the Royal Albert Hall in London. And it's a great live album. If you're interested in Cream and you want to catch some of their live stuff, I definitely recommend that one. Okay, coming in at number 7, we have Def Leppard. And I know a lot of people might think, they're very polished for a classic rock band. They're not really a, bluesy rock band that you'd expect from classic rock. But their earlier albums were kind of in that new wave of British heavy metal umbrella, even though they didn't really sound like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or Saxon. They had a different sound, but they were in that bracket. And then I suppose in the early 1980s, they teamed up with Mutt Lange, and that's when they started making, in my opinion, absolute classic rock, And this album pretty much embodies it. Pyromania, an absolutely classic album. It's got songs like Photograph, Rock Rock Till You Drop, Too Late for Love, Foolin', Rock of Ages, Absolutely brilliant classic rock album and a classic rock band. Led, of course, by Joe Perry, who I had a chance to meet there a couple of years ago. I was at a U2 gig, and he came out of the VIP area for some reason, just over to look at the band, and I spotted him, and I just went over and had a chat and got a photograph with him. So I must tell that story someday on a YouTube video, because he was a very sound guy. But yeah, Joe Elliott is, of course, main songwriter and vocalist for Def Leppard, and then we have the twin guitars of Vivian Campbell and, of course, Phil Collin, not the drummer. On bass was Rick Savage, and on drums was Rick Allen. But they actually, on this particular album, Steve Clark was the guitarist, and he passed away in the 1980s. So, you know, very tragic circumstances there, but definitely a band to watch out for here. Def Leppard, a brilliant band, a brilliant classic rock band in my opinion. Okay, we move on to number 6, and it's Boston. Again, another band, when I think about classic rock, Boston just embody classic rock. First album was a bit of a strange one. Tom Scholz basically played all the instruments himself, wrote most of the songs himself. But then as they went on, they kind of evolved into more of a band. But it's really been the Tom Scholz show. Like he basically rules this band with an iron fist. But yeah, this album is absolutely fantastic. One of the best albums of all time, and it's definitely a classic rock album. There's no doubt about it. More Than a Feeling, you know, that song just embodies everything about classic rock. You've got fantastic lead guitars, fantastic rhythm guitars and vocals, great drums. Everything about that song is just amazing. Peace of Mind is an absolute classic. Foreplay, Long Time, rock and roll band. This album, from start to finish, is not a bad song, and Boston are well deserved at number 6 in my list. Okay, so we're into the top 5. This is going to be very interesting. Okay, number 5 is Aerosmith, an absolutely brilliant classic rock band. But I'm not really talking about their stuff from the 1980s. I'm more talking about their stuff from the 1970s. They released 5 albums in a row from their debut right up to this one, Draw the Line. And to say they were all knockout albums is an understatement. Absolutely brilliant. Brilliant songwriting, brilliant guitars, bass and drums, you know, absolutely class. We have, of course, Joe Perry and Brad Whitford on guitars. We have Steven Tyler on vocals. And we have Joey Kramer on drums and Tom Hamilton on bass. An absolutely brilliant classic rock band. There's no doubt about it. Really set the template for US bands for, you know, where that standard should be. Led Zeppelin were an English band, and Aerosmith were kind of the American take on Led Zeppelin, but they really did their own thing. They sound a bit like the Rolling Stones in some parts, sound a bit like Led Zeppelin in other parts, but to me, those first 5 albums stand head and shoulders above any of their other work, and I think for those alone, they definitely deserve to be on my list for top classic rock bands. So they're in at number 5, Aerosmith, and this is a great album, by the way. Draw the Line, go check that out if you can. Okay, and at number 4, it is AC/DC, the embodiment of classic rock. If you ask a person on the street to name a classic rock band, chances are they're going to say AC/DC. Absolutely brilliant. Of course, led by Malcolm Young and Angus Young. They had a number of different bass players and drummers and singers early on. Then they settled on, you know, a fantastic singer, Bon Scott, absolutely brilliant. And then the classic lineup was Cliff Williams on bass and Phil Rudd on drums. Then, of course, Scott passed away in 1979, 1980, I think, and they come out with Back in Black, which is, you know, one of the best-selling albums of all time. And from there, you know, they just went on and forged a path for themselves with Brian Johnson, releasing fantastic albums like, you know, they had the Razor's Edge in 1990, and then For Those About to Rock, of course, I think that was 1981 or 82. But yeah, Black Ice even 2008, another fantastic album. But yeah, AC/DC well deserving in their place at number 4 in the top classic rock bands. Okay, in at number 3, Deep Purple. Absolutely brilliant classic rock band, no doubt about it. The big thing with Deep Purple was they had fantastic vocals, their guitar player was out of this world, they had keys, Hammond organ, which was very different and differentiated them from Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath at the time. a fantastic drummer in Ian Pace, and on the Mark II lineup, of course, we have Roger Glover on bass, but Roger Glover was also a fantastic producer and a fantastic songwriter. So Deep Purple for me, the Mark II, Mark III, and probably Mark IV lineups, absolutely phenomenal. Can't say much more about this band. They're just number 3 on my list. Could have been a little bit higher, but I think they're absolutely phenomenal. From the first time I heard Deep Purple, I've always liked them. Okay, coming in at number 2, might be a surprise to some people, but it is Thin Lizzy. Second best classic rock band of all time, in my opinion. Absolutely brilliant, led by Phil Lynott, who was an absolute legend, a classic rock star, and from Ireland and black. So you couldn't make all that up, but he certainly forged a path in the 1970s for Irish rock music around the world. He was joined by Brian Downey on drums. They started off with Eric Bell on guitar, but he left after 3 albums. They did some work with Gary Moore, but then this lineup of Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham on twin lead guitars, this is the one that really forged their sound throughout the 1970s. Classic albums such as Fighting, Johnny the Fox, Jailbreak, Bad Reputation, absolutely brilliant. And then you have the Live and Dangerous album. I also spoke the other day about Gary Moore and his contribution on the Black Rose album, absolutely brilliant. Then they brought in a guitar player called Snowy White to do a couple of albums, Renegades and of course Chinatown. And then the last album in their catalogue, Thunder and Lightning, not Ride the Lightning, where they brought in a young guitar player called John Sykes. Absolutely brilliant. But every stage of Thin Lizzy has been class. Like, there's not a bad album in their back catalogue, and as I said the other day, I'm really looking forward to running through their back catalogue album by album and then in a full ranking of all their albums. But yeah, Thin Lizzy, absolutely brilliant. Vocals, lyrics, bass playing, twin lead guitar style, drumming, it's all there. Everything is there. Everything you want from a classic rock band is there. And it's funny, I think they're actually bigger now than they ever were. I see a lot of American channels raving about Thin Lizzy, people that are into classic rock and hard rock. They say Thin Lizzy are one of their favourite bands. But yet, when they went to America in the 1970s, they really didn't make it. They could have done a lot more, but they got, they had a couple of tragedies. Of course, Brian Robertson broke his hand the night before he was due to fly out to America for a tour. Then there was also issues with Phil. He had hepatitis and other things, so luck was against them in America. But it seems that now the legacy of Thin Lizzy is definitely imprinted in hard rock. There's no doubt about it, and I think it's great. But unfortunately, they didn't get the plaudits when they were around. They were massive in Ireland. They were big in the UK, and they were big in Europe. But they never really did it in America, I believe, when they were around. Okay. Next band, this is number 1. My top classic rock band of all time has to be Led Zeppelin. Absolutely brilliant. On vocals, Robert Plant. On guitars, Jimmy Page. On bass, keys, organ, John Paul Jones. And on drums, John Bonham. Can't go wrong. Every Led Zeppelin album is brilliant. There's some that are a little bit below their standard, but they're still a very high standard for any other band. Jimmy Page was a session musician in London in the 1960s, played a bit with the Yardbirds, then decided to go on and form his new thing. He had a contact called John Paul Jones, who also was on the session circuit in London. They decided they wanted to put together a band. They got in contact with a blues singer from the Midlands called Robert Plant. Robert Plant had a mate from his band, I think they were called Band of Joy, his mate was called, of course, John Bonham. John Bonham joins the band, and that's the 4-piece. Start off in the late 1960s with their first album, 1969, I believe. They released 8 absolutely classic albums, and then John Bonham passes away in 1980. And they never reform. They do a couple of tribute gigs and reunion gigs, but they never reform properly. And it just leaves this absolute legacy, similar to the Beatles, similar to Nirvana. They had a small period of time in which they carried out their work, and then that was it. You got no more, and it's left this absolute legacy. They haven't flogged it to death when they absolutely could, and in my opinion, the best classic rock band of all time. They had it all, and no one touches them, in my opinion, and I don't think anyone ever will touch them. Okay, I hope you enjoyed my countdown. I'd like to hear what you think in the comments. Please put your comments in below. Do you agree with me? Would you have the list in a different order? Is there anyone I haven't included here or mentioned at the start that I should have included? What would your list be? Please let me know. I like watching the feedback and see what people react to, and I'm also getting turned on to a lot of brand new bands from the feedback, so I really appreciate it. So just another reminder, hit the subscribe button, hit the like if you liked the video, hit the notification bell and share, and I will talk to you on the next video. Bye for now.